What is an addiction? And I'm going to start with just a very general response to that question, which is basically if you can't control it, you're addicted to it. And so basically what that refers to is engaging in certain often compulsive behaviors that despite our best efforts or even insight and judgment into the problem, we can't stop the behaviors.
So the longest I've ever played video games in a single sitting was around 8 hours. And in the past, whenever my friends hit me up, I would just drop everything I was doing and play. And I'd often play 3 times a day.
I would look for that inability to control the behavior. And also, we're looking for a significant compromise in somebody's life. So if I look at a college student, I'd be looking for example, some compromise in their academic functioning. There's often withdrawal from their social network. Often when there's addiction, you see some decline in somebody's self-care, so not taking as good a care of themselves, and just basically a falling away from their activities of daily life.
So when I first got to college, I realized I had all the freedom to do whatever I wanted. My parents weren't there to stop me. And there was this one weekend, right before 3 of my midterms, that I just stayed up until 7 or 8 a.m. every day, playing games with my friends. And I ended up just failing every single class that semester. My grades just plummeted.
So I do see the use of the internet in general, and certainly iPhones or all forms of phones, more particularly, is a problem in today's society. What I've noticed, and I think a lot of us, not just as psychologists, but that people have become extensions of electrical outlets. They are plugged into everything but themselves. So now what I've noticed here that I'm doing the same classes at Pacific is we don't even need the electrical outlet. So my main concern is that people, and you notice this just walking around, are so plugged into their social media, their iPhone, their computer, that they're not always available to the person they're walking with or having lunch with or eating dinner with. So my main concern as a psychologist is the sort of compromise in emotional and relational intelligence. And just to add to that a bit, here as a psychologist at Pacific, one of the things that we are noticing amongst college students is a real lack of coping mechanisms in terms of the adjustment to college life.
So my entire life, my parents have been very controlling of me, and they basically dictated everything I did. And I realized that video games was kind of an outlet for me to explore myself and just be whoever I wanted to be and just fool around and have fun. And also I enjoy just beating people up and punting noobs, so.
And in terms of particular groups that I think are more at risk, I would think just young people in general, even grammar school through high school. I would say my girlfriend is a local high school teacher, has been teaching for 37 years, and what she's noticing at the high school level even is just increasing distractibility, compromised concentration, attention, difficulty to get the kids to turn their phones off before class, and also that people are having a hard time just functioning academically. So I think young people in general, given the extent that it's more available and they're plugged into that, aren't always, I think, willing to read as much. And I think part of what comes with reading is sort of engaging one's interior life intellectually, emotionally, and creatively. And I think that also sort of maps onto what I was saying earlier in terms of coping mechanisms not being as well established. Basically, I don't think kids are having to spend as much time with themselves in terms of their own mind-body experience, engaging their intellectual functioning, emotional, creative functioning, but are plugging into other sources so they don't have to be with themselves as much.
So around the second semester of my sophomore year, my friends and I decided that it was a good idea to have a video game marathon. And we played straight for 4 days. We actually didn't leave our rooms for the entire time. We only left to eat, use the restroom, and we took like power naps in between games. And after those 4 days, I finally left, and I looked in the mirror and I saw my face, and I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I mean, there was facial hair everywhere. My hair was so greasy, which basically just stuck to my head, and like my eyes were bloodshot. I just didn't like the person I saw. And I knew I needed to make a change.
One of the first things that I would think about, and I'm speaking really in terms of a college population right now, but this would generalize to other populations, is the dimension of avoidance. And so when I think about somebody who is compulsively engaging the internet, whether it's through in terms of gaming or pornography, which is something I've worked a lot with, people are often trying to avoid something, whether it's in their external life or even in their interior life. So in terms of psychological dimensions, think about somebody, I often think of the usual suspects of sort of loneliness, emptiness, and sadness. So just a little preview of basic psychology. Everybody is trying to manage and protect their vulnerability of all time. So oftentimes in my previous life in Boston working with addictions, it wasn't so much that people were trying to feel good through alcohol and or drugs, but they were actually trying to not feel bad, right? So when I think about somebody who's compulsively engaging in any form of internet use, it's often to avoid something. So that can be painful emotional states. So I said loneliness, emptiness, sadness, forms of depression, forms of anxiety. And so what we know when people are like sort of caught up in the internet is there is a sort of not just compulsion, but a sort of dissociation that people often become sort of in a trance state almost, and they lose touch with their body. And when we lose touch with our bodies, of course, we're losing touch with what we feel in our bodies, since all of our feelings are expressed somatically. Let me just connect that then to some of the social causes. So think about somebody who might be in particular suffering from or struggling with loneliness or isolation, right? So the immediate gratification of plugging into the internet and having 1,000 acquaintances, or being able to game, and of course not then dealing with the emotional states internally, or whatever their state of their emotional life or social life might be. So again, just an easy, quick escape. And I think one of the things we're learning on a biological level is that that immediate gratification obviously has consequences in the brain. So there are probably sort of quick hits of dopamine, sort of feel-good chemicals that are flooding the brain. At the same time, the person isn't doing a lot in their life to actually allow those good feelings to come through social interactions or various activities that might improve their self-esteem. So kind of short-term rewards, but oftentimes on the internet, what's being presented isn't particularly challenging. So immediate gratification, but not very challenging, not very rewarding in many ways. And people will often spend hours and hours in a sort of dissociative haze because on some level they're not dealing with certain aspects of their life.
So after I looked at myself in the mirror, I realized I needed to stop. And I uninstalled all my games, told my friends that I was leaving on vacation for a couple months and I couldn't play anymore, and basically just went cold turkey. And the first couple days were actually really hard for me. I just couldn't stop thinking about playing video games. There was nothing I could do other than think about that. I finally found a way to, I guess, deal with it, like cope with it, which was to start gymming. I started gymming a lot, actually, multiple times a day, in fact. And I also started collecting stuffed animals, because that's what my friend recommended to me. He also loves stuffed animals, so. I stopped video games for a good 3 or 4 months, up until the point where I wasn't just constantly thinking about it 24/7. And I did eventually start playing again, and I still now play, but it's much healthier now. I don't just obsess over going back to it. And I also asked one of my college friends to check up on me every once in a while, just to make sure I wasn't just going overboard. Now I play maybe 1 to 2 hours every other day, so it's much better. I've seen my mental and physical health go up, my grades are improving.
So yes, in terms of considering whether one might actually have an addiction to the internet, I think a good start is actually, if you're even having that thought, not that that's diagnostic, but I would appreciate somebody being reflective and introspective enough to even consider that. So if you're having that thought, again, everything's a matter of degree, but you might be at least on the road. You may not be really far down the road, but again, things to consider. To what extent is this behavior interfering with other aspects of my life? So if there's an inordinate amount of time spent on the internet, I might be looking at, again, what is the cost to me in terms of time with friends, time spent in enjoyed activities, whatever that might be, listening to music, going to the gym. I'm looking for some decline in self-care. And then I'm just trusting the person. So when I'm working with somebody in the context of therapy, people inevitably know themselves pretty well. And if I ask somebody straight out what the cost is of that behavior, and they're being real and transparent, they will let me know and generally have a pretty good idea of whether they're on the road to addiction. So again, where I started this interview, if you can't control it, you're addicted to it. So if you can't pull in the reins and regulate that behavior, how much time you're spending on it, there's a good chance you're probably addicted to it.